The sun wasn't even fully up over the McDowell Mountains, and already the Scottsdale heat was plotting my demise. I was standing at the absolute edge of my meticulously edged concrete driveway, wearing absolutely nothing but a pair of faded plaid boxers, some highly questionable neon green Crocs, and a heavy terry cloth bathrobe that had definitely seen better decades. In my right hand, I held a chipped ceramic mug filled to the brim with lukewarm, aggressively strong black coffee. It was 6:42 a.m. on a Tuesday. The neighborhood was quiet, the desert birds were chirping, and I was in the middle of a hostage negotiation with a woman who treated a clipboard like a loaded weapon. Her name was Brenda. Brenda was the reigning president of the Desert Oasis Homeowners Association. She was a woman of indeterminate middle age who seemingly sustained her life force entirely on boxed Pinot Grigio, weaponized neighborhood gossip, and the petty subjugation of her immediate neighbors. She wore a visor that cast a sharp shadow over her permanently furrowed brow, and her tennis outfit was so aggressively bright white, it practically reflected the rising sun back into my retinas. Right now, she wasn't looking at me. She was hyperventilating while physically pressing a ring of cardboard color swatches directly against the 4x4 wooden post holding up my mailbox. "It is exactly as I suspected," Brenda announced to the empty street, her voice a piercing, nasal shriek that could probably shatter tempered glass at 50 paces. I took a slow, agonizing sip of my coffee, feeling the sludge hit the bottom of my empty stomach. "Good morning to you too, Brenda. Beautiful day to stand on my property line and yell at an inanimate object, isn't it? Have you considered decaf? Or maybe a hobby that doesn't involve lurking in my bushes before sunrise?" Brenda whipped her head around, her eyes narrowing into two venomous little slits. She didn't miss a beat. She never did. "This isn't a joke, young man. This is a severe violation of the community trust. Look at this. Just look at it." She tapped the swatch violently against the wood. "This is Pantone 4645C. Do you know what Pantone 4645C is?" "I'm going to guess it's not your favorite flavor of ice cream," I deadpanned, shifting my weight to my left crock. "Brenda, it's a piece of pressure-treated lumber. It holds the box where the government delivers my junk mail and credit card offers. It's doing its job." "It is an eyesore," she screeched, taking a step toward me and invading my personal space bubble with the distinct scent of expensive hairspray and militant righteousness. "It is fading. It is tacky. And worst of all, it is in direct, flagrant violation of Section 4, Paragraph B of the Desert Oasis Master Deed and Bylaws." I rubbed the bridge of my nose, feeling a headache blossoming right behind my eyes. This was not my first rodeo with the Desert Oasis HOA. When I moved into this upscale, aggressively manicured slice of Arizona suburbia 2 years ago, I thought I was just buying a nice house with a decent pool. I didn't realize I was enlisting in a homeowner's militia commanded by a woman who measured lawn grass with a plastic ruler. "Brenda, listen to me very carefully," I said, trying to keep my voice level and reasonable, despite the fact that I was arguing with a woman holding a color wheel at dawn. "I bought that post at Home Depot 6 months ago. I dug the hole, I poured the concrete, I leveled it. It's a wooden post. It sits in the Arizona sun for 14 hours a day. It's going to get a little faded. It's called nature. You know, that thing happening outside your aggressively air-conditioned living room? Nature is not an excuse for property devaluation," Brenda shot back, her face turning an alarming shade of magenta that I was sure she had a Pantone swatch for somewhere. "We have standards in Desert Oasis. We have a cohesive aesthetic. When one property looks like a derelict shack in the backwoods, it drags all of our property values down into the mud." "It's a mailbox post, Brenda, not a rusted-out Camaro on cinder blocks in the front yard. Nobody is refusing to buy a house in this zip code because my 4x4 is slightly less beige than it was in February. You are mocking me, she accused, pointing a perfectly manicured acrylic fingernail directly at my chest. You always mock the rules. You think you're above them. You think because you keep your yard clean, you can just ignore the details. Well, the devil is in the details, and I am the one who catches him. I actually barked out a laugh at that. Did you practice that line in the mirror, or did it just come to you in a flash of dictatorial brilliance? Brenda ignored the jab. She spun around, marched back to my mailbox, and aggressively slapped a heavy stock neon pink piece of paper directly onto the front of my black metal mailbox. She slapped it so hard the metal rang out with a hollow thud. What is that? I asked, my amusement instantly evaporating, replaced by a cold, familiar annoyance. Did you just put a bumper sticker on my property? That, Brenda said, standing tall and crossing her arms over her chest with an air of absolute smug victory, is a formal citation from the Architectural Control Committee, of which I am the chairwoman. Obviously, I muttered, walking slowly down the driveway to inspect the damage. I leaned in and squinted at the pink slip. It was a pre-printed form, but the blank spaces had been filled out in an aggressive, jagged, cursive handwriting that clearly belonged to Brenda. It had my address, today's date, and the time marked as 6:45 a.m. Under the section labeled Nature of Violation, she had written a paragraph so dense and furious she had nearly torn through the paper with her pen. Read it aloud, Brenda demanded, hovering right over my shoulder. I want to make sure you fully comprehend the gravity of the situation you've put yourself in. I took another sip of my coffee, purely to spite her impatience, and then began to read. Property owner is in severe violation of Section 4, Paragraph B, regarding curb appeal and exterior fixtures. The structural support of the mail receptacle is visibly deteriorating, fading, and presenting a tacky, substandard appearance unbecoming of the Desert Oasis community. Keep reading, she urged, practically vibrating with excitement. I sighed, tracing the jagged cursive with my eyes. Owner is hereby ordered to rectify the situation within 72 hours of the issuance of this notice. Failure to comply will result in an immediate fine of $500, with an additional $500 fine compounding every 24 hours until the violation is resolved to the absolute satisfaction of the Architectural Control Committee. I stopped reading and slowly turned my head to look at her. She was smiling. It was a terrifying, triumphant smile. $500 a day? I asked, keeping my voice dangerously quiet. For a piece of wood being the wrong shade of brown? The bylaws are the bylaws, Brenda said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. We all signed the same contract when we moved in. We all agreed to uphold the standards. If you didn't want to live in a premier, luxury community, you should have bought a house in Phoenix. Brenda, this is extortion. You are standing in my driveway, extorting me over a Home Depot 4x4. I am enforcing the rules, she corrected, tapping the pink paper. And you have exactly 72 hours from right now, which means by Friday morning at 6:45 a.m., if that post is not fixed, the fines begin. And I promise you I will put a lien on your house so fast it will make your head spin. I stared at her. I really, truly looked at her. I saw the absolute joy in her eyes. This wasn't about property values. This wasn't about a cohesive neighborhood aesthetic. This was about power. Brenda had virtually zero control over her actual life, her husband who worked 80 hours a week to avoid her, or her adult children who never called. But here, in the Desert Oasis HOA, she was a god. She could ruin a man's week over a mailbox post. And she loved it. Something cold and entirely unhinged snapped into place in the back of my brain. I had played nice for 2 years. I had painted my trim the exact shade of desert sand they demanded. I had removed the decorative rock garden because it was too avant-garde. I had smiled and nodded and paid my exorbitant dues, but not today, not over a mailbox. "Okay, Brenda," I said, my voice suddenly very calm, very smooth. "Let's say I want to comply. Let's say I want to be a good little neighbor and fix this egregious eyesore. What exactly do you want me to do? Replace the post entirely?" Brenda blinked, slightly thrown by my sudden lack of resistance. She was geared up for a screaming match, not compliance. "Well, replacing it would be the most thorough option. Yes." "And if I don't want to dig another 3-foot hole in the Arizona clay?" I asked. "What does the citation actually demand I do to the existing post to bring it into compliance?" Brenda gestured impatiently to the bottom of the pink slip. "It's right there in the remediation section. I wrote it out specifically so there would be no confusion, no wiggle room, and no excuses from you." I leaned back in and looked at the very bottom of the slip. In bold, underlined, heavily indented cursive, Brenda had written the exact terms of my surrender. I read it aloud, speaking very slowly, letting every single syllable hang in the dry morning air. "Owner must refinish, paint, or coat the post in a rust-proof, weather-resistant, naturally occurring earth tone or metallic finish to prevent rot and restore community aesthetic." I stopped. I read it again in my head. Refinish, paint, or coat. Rust-proof, weather-resistant, naturally occurring earth tone or metallic finish. I looked up at Brenda. She looked back at me, her chin raised in defiance. "That's it?" I asked, tapping the bottom of the paper. "That's the exact wording from the bylaws? Because if I do exactly what this sentence says, I'm clear? The fines go away, and you leave me alone?" "That is exactly what the bylaws state regarding exterior wood fixtures," Brenda said proudly, crossing her arms again. "I copied it verbatim from the master document. You must coat it in a naturally occurring earth tone or a metallic finish. None of those bright, obnoxious colors you see in the lower-class neighborhoods. It must be dignified. It must be sealed against the weather. If you do exactly that, the matter is closed." "Naturally occurring earth tone," I repeated, rolling the words around in my mouth. "Or a metallic finish." "Yes," she snapped. "Brown, bronze, copper, dark green. Earth tones, metallic finishes. It's not complicated. Are you having trouble understanding the vocabulary?" "No," I said, a massive, uncontainable grin suddenly breaking out across my face. I couldn't help it. The loophole was so massive, so glaringly obvious, and so incredibly stupid that it felt like a gift from the universe itself. "No, Brenda. I understand the vocabulary perfectly. In fact, I think I have the perfect solution. A beautiful, weather-resistant, naturally occurring metallic finish." Brenda looked at me suspiciously. She didn't like the smile. It unnerved her. "Just make sure it's done by Friday morning. I will be here at 6:45 a.m. sharp to inspect it. If it is not up to code, the fine is automatic." "Oh, it'll be done," I assured her, taking a massive gulp of my coffee. "You have my absolute word on that. I'm going to make this mailbox the crown jewel of the Desert Oasis community. You won't even believe your eyes." "We'll see," Brenda huffed, turning on her heel. She marched down my driveway, her tennis shoes squeaking loudly on the concrete, and strutted across the street to her own perfectly manicured, soulless fortress of a house. I stood there for a long time after she left, staring at the faded wooden post. I looked at the pink slip of paper. I read the words one more time. Naturally occurring, metallic finish. Gold is a metal. Gold comes from the earth. Gold does not rust. Gold is entirely weather-resistant. It was, by the exact verbatim definition of the Desert Oasis Master Deed and Bylaws, a naturally occurring, rust-proof, metallic finish. I started laughing. I laughed so hard I almost spilled my coffee on my Crocs. It started as a chuckle and built into a full-blown, slightly hysterical belly laugh that echoed down the quiet suburban street. A guy walking his golden retriever on the opposite sidewalk stopped and stared at me like I had lost my mind. I probably had, but I didn't care. I tore the pink slip off the mailbox, folded it neatly into a tiny square, and shoved it into the pocket of my bathrobe. I turned around and practically sprinted back up my driveway, bursting through my front door and beelining straight for my home office. I threw myself into my desk chair, slammed my coffee mug down, and ripped open my laptop. The clock in the corner of the screen read 7:05 a.m. I had exactly 69 hours and 40 minutes to execute the most spectacularly petty, financially irresponsible, and legally bulletproof act of malicious compliance in the history of homeowners associations. I didn't need brown paint. I didn't need bronze sealant. I needed a guy who knew how to work with 24-karat gold. I opened up a browser window and immediately typed "Custom Gold Leaf Application Contractors Scottsdale" into the search bar. The results were mostly high-end interior designers, antique restorers, and people who put gold flakes on incredibly expensive, incredibly tasteless desserts. None of that was going to work. I needed someone gritty. I needed someone who wouldn't ask too many questions. I needed a mercenary. I clicked over to Craigslist, navigated to the skilled trade section, and started scrolling. I bypassed the drywall guys, the plumbers, and the handymen offering to clean gutters. I needed an artist with questionable judgment and a flexible schedule. After about 20 minutes of frantic scrolling, I found a listing buried on the third page. It was entirely in capital letters. Custom finishes, paint, epoxy, gold leaf, silver leaf, weird projects. Welcome, no questions asked as long as the check clears. Call Mike. There was a blurry photo attached to the listing of a motorcycle gas tank that had been covered in what looked like genuine silver leaf, set against a backdrop of a very messy, heavily cluttered garage. It was perfect. I picked up my cell phone, dialed the number, and listened to it ring. It rang 4 times before someone picked up. "Yeah," a voice grunted. It sounded like the guy had been gargling gravel and smoking unfiltered cigarettes since the late 80s. "Is this Mike?" I asked, matching his abrupt tone. "Depends who's asking and what you want," Mike replied. I could hear the flick of a lighter and a deep inhale on the other end of the line. "My name is not important right now," I said, leaning back in my chair and staring at the pink citation sitting on my desk. "What is important is that I saw your ad on Craigslist, specifically the part about gold leaf, weird projects, and no questions asked." "All right," Mike said, his voice losing a bit of the gravel and gaining a hint of genuine interest. "I'm listening. What's the job? Antique mirror frame? Custom hot rod dashboard? You want me to gild a statue of your dog?" "No," I said, taking a deep breath. "I have a 4x4 pressure-treated wooden mailbox post in my front yard. It's roughly 48 inches tall. I need you to come to my house, prep the wood, and cover the entire visible surface area in authentic 24-karat gold leaf. And I need it done before Thursday night." There was a very long, very heavy silence on the other end of the line. For a second, I thought the call had dropped. "Mike? You there?" "Buddy," Mike finally said, exhaling a massive cloud of smoke that I could practically hear over the speaker. Are you drunk? It's 7 in the morning. I am stone cold sober, Mike. I am drinking black coffee and looking at a citation from my HOA. I am dead serious. You want me to put real, actual gold leaf on a piece of wood that holds junk mail out by the street? Mike clarified, his voice laced with absolute disbelief. Do you have any idea how much 24-karat gold leaf costs? Do you know how incredibly tedious it is to apply that to rough outdoor lumber? I don't care about the cost, Mike. I care about the aesthetic. And I care about the timeline. Can you do it or not? I mean, physically, yes. I can do it, Mike muttered, clearly doing some rapid mental math. I gotta sand the absolute hell out of that post. I gotta hit it with 3 coats of outdoor primer, lay down an adhesive sizing, apply the gold sheet by sheet, and then seal it in marine-grade clear coat so it doesn't flake off the second the wind blows. It's a massive pain in the ass. It's going to cost you easily $2,000, maybe 2.5, depending on the spot price of the gold books I gotta buy. 3,000, I countered immediately. I will pay you $3,000 in cold, hard cash. But you have to start today, and it has to be absolutely, perfectly flawless. It needs to look like a solid bar of gold grew out of the concrete. Another long silence, the sound of a cigarette being crushed out in an ashtray. Text me the address, Mike said. I'll be there in an hour to look at the wood. Have the coffee ready. You got it, Mike. I hung up the phone and tossed it onto the desk. I leaned back, lacing my fingers behind my head, staring at the ceiling. The adrenaline was pumping through my veins, masking the exhaustion of the early morning wake-up call. I was about to drop $3,000 just to spite a woman named Brenda. It was financially absurd. It was incredibly petty. And it was going to be the greatest thing I had ever done. I spent the next 45 minutes pacing around my house, occasionally peeking out the front window to make sure Brenda wasn't lurking in the cul-de-sac. Promptly at 8 o'clock, a beat-up, aggressively rusted Ford Econoline van rattled down the street. It sounded like an angry washing machine full of loose bolts. The van screeched to a halt right in front of my driveway, entirely blocking my mailbox. The driver's side door aggressively groaned open, and a man stepped out. He looked exactly how he sounded. Mike was in his late 50s, wiry and tanned to the texture of old leather. He wore a faded black t-shirt, paint-splattered cargo shorts, and work boots that had seen at least 3 different wars. He had a cigarette hanging out of the corner of his mouth and a measuring tape clipped to his belt. I walked out the front door, coffee mug in hand, and met him at the end of the driveway. "You the guy with the HOA problem?" Mike asked, sizing me up, taking in my bathrobe and Crocs with a look of mild amusement. "I'm the guy," I confirmed, extending a hand. "Thanks for coming out so fast." Mike shook my hand. His grip felt like a bench vise. "Cash is cash, buddy. Let's see this masterpiece." He walked around the back of his van and stood in front of the mailbox post. He took a long, slow drag of his cigarette, his eyes scanning up and down the faded, chipped wood. He reached out and knocked on it with his knuckles. "It's pressure-treated pine," Mike muttered, mostly to himself. "Rough cut, faded to hell. Grain is raised." He looked over his shoulder at me. "You weren't kidding. The HOA got on your ass for this?" "They handed me a citation at dawn," I said, pulling the pink slip out of my bathrobe pocket and handing it to him. "Read the bottom line." Mike took the slip, squinting at Brenda's jagged cursive. He read it silently, his lips moving slightly. When he reached the end, he paused. He read it again. Slowly, a massive, nicotine-stained grin spread across his face. He started to laugh, a deep, raspy chuckle that turned into a full cough. "Naturally occurring metallic finish," Mike wheezed, handing the slip back to me. "Oh, buddy, you are an evil, evil genius." "I try," I smiled. "So? What's the verdict? Can you turn this thing into a monument to malicious compliance?" Mike tossed his cigarette butt onto the street and crushed it with his boot. "It's gonna take work. I can't just slap gold leaf on this. It'll look like garbage. I gotta sand it down past the weathering, fill the cracks with wood bondo, sand it again, prime it smooth. And then we lay the gold. Then I gotta encapsulate the whole thing in automotive clear coat so the sun doesn't strip it off. Whatever it takes, Mike. I need it done, and I need it to shine so bright it pisses off God." Mike walked over to his van and pulled open the heavy sliding door, revealing a chaotic mess of tools, paint cans, drop cloths, and air compressors. "I'll need to go to the specialty art supply store in Phoenix to buy out their entire stock of 24-karat patent gold leaf books. I'm going to need half the money up front to cover materials." "Done," I said instantly. "I'll go to the ATM right now." "All right," Mike said, pulling out a heavy-duty palm sander and a massive extension cord. "You go get the money. I'm gonna start making some noise. I hope your neighbors like the sound of 80 grit sandpaper at 8 in the morning." "Mike," I said, looking over at Brenda's house, noting that her pristine front curtains were twitching. "I hope you make as much noise as humanly possible." For the next 8 hours, my front yard became an active construction zone. Mike was a machine. He set up a pop-up canopy tent over the mailbox to block the brutal Arizona sun, threw down massive canvas drop cloths, and went to work. The sound of his industrial sander echoed through the quiet suburban streets, a relentless grinding roar that drowned out the chirping birds and the distant hum of pool pumps. I spent the day working from my home office, keeping one eye on my monitors and the other on the live feed from my front doorbell camera. I watched as Mike stripped the post down to bare, pale wood. I watched as he aggressively filled every crack and knot with pink bondo, sanding it down until the post looked perfectly cylindrical and smooth. By 3 in the afternoon, he was spraying on thick layers of high-build automotive primer, transforming the post into a sleek, matte gray obelisk. And I watched the neighbors. It was incredible. The Desert Oasis community operated on a very strict, unspoken code of conduct. You did not make noise during the day. You did not do your own loud landscaping. And you certainly did not set up a tent in your front yard and spray paint things. Cars slowed to a crawl as they drove past my house. People walking their dogs came to a complete halt, staring openly at the chaotic scene. And then there was Brenda. She came out of her house no less than 4 times. The first time, she marched halfway across the street, opening her mouth to yell over the sound of the sander, before Mike turned around, lowered his respirator mask, and gave her a look so deeply unhinged she actually turned around and scurried back inside. The second, third, and 4th times, she just stood at the edge of her driveway, arms crossed, glaring daggers at my property, furiously texting on her phone. She was waiting for me to come outside. She wanted an explanation. I didn't give her one. I just stayed inside, drank water, and watched the show. By 6 o'clock, the sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, casting long, golden shadows across the pavement. I walked outside, carrying 2 ice-cold bottles of water, and approached the tent. Mike had stripped off his t-shirt and was working in a sweat-soaked white tank top. The air smelled strongly of chemical solvents and adhesive. He had finished the priming and had applied a layer of something called sizing, a specialized glue used for gilding. It was painted over the entire post, leaving a slightly tacky, amber-colored sheen. "How's it looking, Mike?" I asked, handing him a water bottle. Mike took it, downed half of it in one gulp, and wiped his forehead with the back of his arm. Primer is rock solid. The sizing is setting up nice. It needs to get to tack, meaning it's sticky but doesn't pull off on your finger. Give it another 30 minutes, and we start laying the gold. You're an artist, Mike. I'm a guy who likes getting paid $3 grand to ruin an HOA's week, he corrected, gesturing to a small cooler he had brought from his van. Inside, protected in Ziploc bags, were dozens of tiny, incredibly thin books of gold leaf. This stuff is so light, if you breathe on it wrong, it flies away. The wind dies down at sunset. That's when we strike. We sat in silence for 30 minutes, leaning against the side of his van, watching the neighborhood go about its evening routine. I could feel the tension in the air. The HOA grapevine was definitely buzzing. Everyone knew I had gotten a citation that morning. Everyone knew I was doing something insane to my mailbox. Finally, the sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the sky in vibrant shades of purple and orange. The wind completely died down. The air was still and heavy. Mike stood up, cracked his knuckles, and walked over to the cooler. He carefully extracted a book of gold leaf, grabbed an incredibly soft, wide brush that looked like it belonged in a makeup kit, and stepped under the canopy. "All right," Mike whispered, almost reverently. "Showtime." I watched, utterly mesmerized, as Mike performed a masterclass in delicate craftsmanship. He opened the tiny book, revealing a square of gold so thin it was practically translucent. With a flick of his wrist and a delicate tap of the brush, he lifted the gold leaf off the paper and laid it directly onto the sticky, amber-coated post. The moment the gold touched the sizing, it aggressively adhered, flattening out perfectly. Mike took the soft brush and gently smoothed it down, pushing out any tiny air bubbles. Instantly, a 3-inch square of the drab gray post exploded into brilliant, pure, reflective gold. It was stunning. It wasn't paint. It didn't look like spray paint or cheap foil. It looked exactly like what it was: solid, elemental gold. It caught the fading twilight and practically glowed from within. Mike didn't stop. He moved with a rhythmic, practiced precision. Open the book, lift the leaf, place, brush, smooth. He worked his way down the post, overlapping the squares ever so slightly, creating a seamless, blindingly bright surface. It took him nearly 3 hours. He worked under the harsh glare of a portable halogen work light, sweating profusely, cursing softly, whenever a piece of leaf tore or folded over on itself. I stood nearby, fetching him fresh water, holding tools, and entirely failing to contain my giddy laughter. By 9 o'clock, he was done. He stepped back, exhausted, covered in tiny specks of gold dust that made him look like some kind of grimy, chain-smoking fairy. He reached over and clicked off the halogen work light. And there it was. The streetlights had come on, casting a pale yellow glow across the neighborhood. But my mailbox post didn't need the streetlights. It commanded its own light. The 4x4 wooden timber had been completely transformed into a towering ingot of pure, unadulterated 24-karat luxury. It was obnoxiously bright. It was obscenely expensive-looking. It was the tackiest, most beautiful thing I had ever seen in my entire life. "My God, Mike," I whispered, walking slowly toward it. "It's magnificent." "It's loud," Mike was corrected, admiring his handiwork. "It is incredibly loud. Wait till I hit it with the high-gloss clear coat tomorrow morning. It's going to look like it's wet. People driving by are going to get blinded by the glare." "I love it," I said, reaching out to touch it, before Mike violently slapped my hand away. "Don't touch it," he barked. "It's raw gold. Your finger oils will tarnish it before I can seal it. I gotta come back at dawn, spray it with 3 coats of marine urethane, and then you can lick the damn thing for all I care. But until then, nobody breathes on it." "Understood," I said, rubbing the back of my hand, but smiling like an idiot. "You come back tomorrow morning, finish the clear coat, and I hand you the remaining $1,500 in cash." "Deal," Mike said, rapidly packing up his tools and tossing them haphazardly into the back of his van. He didn't bother taking down the canopy tent. He just left it standing over the golden post, like a protective shroud. "I'll see you at 6 a.m., buddy. Try not to let anyone steal your mailbox tonight." "I'll guard it with my life," I promised. Mike slammed the van doors, hopped in the driver's seat, and fired up the rattling engine. He threw me a peace sign out the window and rattled off into the night, leaving me alone in my driveway. I stood there for a long time, just staring at the post. The gold leaf picked up the ambient light from the street lamps and the distant porch lights, shimmering with a deep, rich luster. It was so out of place in this neighborhood of muted earth tones, beige stucco, and faux stone facades. It was an act of pure, distilled defiance, wrapped in an undeniable layer of malicious compliance. I turned around and looked across the street. Brenda's house was entirely dark, save for the faint, flickering blue light of a television in the upstairs master bedroom. She had absolutely no idea what was waiting for her tomorrow morning. I smiled, turned around, and walked back into my house, locking the front door behind me. I had hit the required word count for the day. Tomorrow, the real war was going to begin, and I was going to win. I barely slept that night. I kept waking up, tossing back the covers, and peering through the slats of my bedroom blinds just to make sure nobody had touched my masterpiece. Every time a car drove past, the headlights would catch the gold leaf, and a blinding reflection would shoot across my bedroom ceiling like a searchlight. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. I was absolutely exhausted, but running on pure, spiteful adrenaline. At exactly 5:55 in the morning, the familiar rattling roar of Mike's rusted Ford Econoline shattered the suburban peace. I grabbed my bathrobe, shoved my feet back into my neon Crocs, and stumbled out the front door. The desert air was still surprisingly cool, holding on to the last little bit of night chill before the sun crested the mountains and baked us all alive. Mike was already out of the van, a cigarette dangling precariously from his lips, shaking a massive aerosol can of marine-grade urethane clear coat. "Morning, boss," Mike grunted, not looking away from the post. He had a heavy-duty respirator mask hanging around his neck. "You ready for this thing to look like a wet mirror?" "I was born ready, Mike. Do it." He pulled the respirator up over his nose and mouth, adjusted the straps, and pressed the nozzle. For the next 20 minutes, my front yard smelled like a toxic combination of acetone and victory. Mike applied 3 heavy, even coats of the urethane as the clear coat hit the raw gold leaf. The transformation was instantaneous. The slightly matte, delicate texture of the raw gold vanished, replaced by an impossibly deep, high-gloss shine. It literally looked like liquid gold had been poured over the wood and frozen in time. It was so reflective you could probably use it to signal low-flying aircraft. "All right," Mike said, pulling off his mask and taking a deep breath of clean air. "She's sealed, waterproof, UV-resistant, and hard as a rock. You could hit that thing with a baseball bat, and the gold wouldn't chip. The wood might dent, but the finish is bulletproof." I handed him an envelope containing the remaining $1,500 in cash. I didn't even count it out. He had earned every single penny. "You are a maestro, Mike. If I ever need to gild a toaster oven or something, you are my first call." Mike laughed, a harsh, coughing bark, and shoved the envelope into his cargo shorts. He quickly collapsed his pop-up canopy, threw his drop cloths into the back of his van, and slammed the doors. "Good luck with the HOA, lady, buddy. Try not to get arrested." "No promises," I yelled over the sound of his engine as he drove off. I checked my watch. It was 6:35 a.m. Brenda had explicitly promised she would be here at 6:45 a.m. sharp for her inspection. I had 10 minutes. I didn't go inside. I didn't get coffee. I just pulled up a plastic lawn chair from my side yard, placed it right in the middle of my driveway, and sat down. I crossed my legs, folded my arms, and waited. The sun finally broke over the peaks of the McDowell Mountains, and the first direct rays of morning light hit the mailbox post. It was actually blinding. I had to squint. The 24-karat gold caught the sunlight and exploded into a radiant, fiery glow. It was the most obnoxious object I had ever laid eyes on, standing tall and proud amongst the muted beige stucco and manicured green lawns of Desert Oasis. At exactly 6:44 a.m., Brenda's front door opened. She stepped out, wearing a matching tracksuit that was the exact color of an overripe peach, holding a stainless steel travel mug and her ever-present clipboard. She locked her door without looking across the street, turned, and began her march down her driveway. I sat completely still, barely breathing. She stepped onto the asphalt of the street. She looked down to check her phone. She took 3 more steps. And then she looked up. I wish I had been recording it. I honestly, genuinely wish I had a high-definition camera pointed directly at her face, because the sequence of emotions that flashed across Brenda's features belonged in a museum. First, there was confusion. She squinted, bringing a hand up to shield her eyes from the glare. Then, as her brain processed the object standing at the end of my driveway, the confusion morphed into absolute, unfiltered shock. Her mouth dropped open. She stopped dead in her tracks, right in the middle of the street. The stainless steel travel mug slipped from her fingers. It hit the pavement with a loud clang, popping the plastic lid off and sending hot coffee splattering across her pristine white running shoes. She didn't even notice. She just stared at the golden obelisk. "Good morning, Brenda," I called out cheerfully, not moving from my lawn chair. "Beautiful morning for an inspection, isn't it?" Her head snapped toward me. The shock was instantly replaced by a deep, terrifying shade of crimson rage. She literally marched toward me, stomping her coffee-soaked shoes on the asphalt, her clipboard gripped so tightly her knuckles were white. "What is that?" she hissed, stopping exactly at my property line, pointing a trembling finger at the mailbox post. "That?" I asked, feigning innocence. "That is my remediated mailbox post, per your strict instructions and the official Desert Oasis Master Deed and Bylaws, specifically Section 4, Paragraph B." "It is yellow!" she screamed, her voice echoing down the quiet street, a few early morning dog walkers turning their heads in alarm. "It is bright, neon, reflective yellow. I told you earth tones. I told you metallic finishes. You have completely lost your mind." I stood up slowly, reaching into the pocket of my bathrobe, and pulled out the crumpled pink citation she had slapped on the box 24 hours earlier. I unfolded it meticulously and held it up. "Actually, Brenda, I did exactly what you told me to do. It says right here, in your own beautiful handwriting, rust-proof, weather-resistant, naturally occurring earth tone or metallic finish." I walked over to the post, placing my hand lovingly on the warm, gold-leafed surface. "This, Brenda, is 24-karat gold leaf. It is a naturally occurring element. It comes from the earth. It is completely rust-proof, as gold does not oxidize, and it is, by definition, the ultimate metallic finish. Brenda stared at me, her chest heaving. Her brain was clearly trying to process the logic, trying to find a hole in it, trying to figure out how I had managed to turn her own weaponized bureaucracy against her. "You covered your mailbox post in actual gold?" she whispered, the rage briefly giving way to utter bewilderment. "Just the wood parts," I corrected politely. "I left the metal box itself black, as I felt gilding the box might be a bit too flashy, you know? Have to maintain some level of neighborhood decorum." "It is an abomination," she shrieked, finding her voice again. "It is an eyesore. It looks like a prop from a cheap casino. You are mocking this entire community." "I am complying with the community bylaws to the exact, literal letter of the law," I said, dropping the friendly act and locking eyes with her. "You demanded a metallic finish. You demanded I fix the fading. I spent $3,000 fixing it. It's finished. It's beautiful. The citation is resolved. Have a wonderful Tuesday." "No," Brenda stamped her foot. She actually, literally stamped her foot like a toddler denied a toy. "No, I am not accepting this. This violates the spirit of the rules. This violates the cohesive aesthetic. I am the president of the Architectural Control Committee, and I am telling you that this thing is coming down." "You can't just change the rules because you don't like my interpretation of them, Brenda. It's gold. It's metal. I'm in compliance." "Compliance?" she scoffed, stepping closer, her face inches from mine. "You think you're so smart? You think you can just outsmart the board with some ridiculous, expensive stunt? Watch me. I will call a special emergency hearing of the board this evening. We will pass an addendum specifically outlawing this exact finish. And tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. sharp, I am sending Hector and the HOA maintenance crew over here with a chainsaw. We are cutting that gaudy, horrific thing down to the stump, and we are billing you for the removal." My heart did a slight, panicked flutter in my chest. She was actually crazy enough to do it. The HOA bylaws did have a provision that allowed the board to forcefully remedy a property violation if the homeowner refused, billing the homeowner for the labor. "You touch this post, Brenda, and you're going to have a massive lawsuit on your hands," I warned, stepping in front of the gold pillar. "I have the full authority of the Desert Oasis Homeowners Association behind me," she sneered, her confidence returning in full force. She raised her clipboard like a shield. "You have 24 hours to enjoy your little joke. Tomorrow morning, it's firewood. And if you try to stop Hector, I will call the police and have you arrested for interfering with HOA operations on a community easement." She spun around, nearly tripping over her own coffee cup in the street, and marched back to her house. She slammed her front door so hard the decorative stained glass window rattled. I stood in my driveway, the sun beating down on my face, my brain working in absolute overdrive. She was going to cut it down. She genuinely believed that her title as HOA president gave her the legal right to dispatch a landscaping crew to destroy $3,000 worth of property because it hurt her feelings. I knew Hector. Hector was a nice guy who just wanted to get paid and not get yelled at by Brenda. If she ordered him to cut it down, he would do it just to avoid her screaming at him. I couldn't let that happen. Not just because of the money, but because of the principle. I was playing a game of high-stakes legal loophole chess, and Brenda had just tried to flip the board over. I needed a defense. I needed a physical barrier between Hector's chainsaw and my 24-carat masterpiece. I couldn't just stand out here all day and night. I had to work. I had to sleep. I walked back inside, went straight to my office, and fired up my laptop. I ignored my actual job emails and opened a new search tab. I didn't need a lawyer. A lawyer would take weeks to file an injunction. I needed immediate, physical deterrence. I typed, Private Armed Security Contractors, Residential Scottsdale. The results were mostly high-end firms that provided executive protection for celebrities or night watchmen for luxury construction sites. I started making calls. The first 3 companies hung up on me. "Let me get this straight," the dispatcher at Apex Security Group said. "You want to hire an armed protection officer to stand in your driveway and guard a wooden stick? It is a highly valuable, custom-gilded architectural feature," I explained smoothly. "And yes, I have received credible, specific threats of vandalism and property destruction occurring tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. I need a visible, imposing, and armed deterrent on site. Sir, we protect human assets and commercial high-value targets. We don't guard mailboxes. Have a nice day." Click. I groaned, running my hands through my hair. I tried a 4th company, a smaller local outfit called Ironclad Solutions. A gruff voice answered. "Ironclad. Hi, I need to hire a static guard for a residential property in Scottsdale, immediately. I need them armed, I need them in uniform, and I need them to sit in a lawn chair for the next 48 hours straight." "What's the threat profile?" the voice asked, sounding entirely unfazed by the request. "My Homeowners Association president," I said honestly. "She threatened to bring a landscaping crew with a chainsaw tomorrow morning to cut down a piece of property in my front yard that I just spent $3,000 covering in gold leaf. She's unhinged, she's highly aggressive, and she drives a golf cart like she's in Mad Max." There was a pause. I heard a deep chuckle. "You gilded a lawn gnome to piss off your HOA?" "A mailbox post, and I didn't do it to piss her off. I did it to comply with a highly specific, poorly written metallic finish clause in the bylaws." The guy on the phone actually laughed out loud. "I love it. Pure tactical spite. Listen, I have a guy coming off a night shift guarding a copper wire depot down in Mesa. He's big, he's licensed to carry, and he possesses absolutely zero sense of humor. He's perfect for suburban deterrence. It's going to cost you, though. Short notice, armed static post, hazmat pay for dealing with an HOA president. I'm looking at $75 an hour." "Done," I said, not even hesitating. The budget for this revenge operation had officially blown past reasonable, but I was fully committed. "When can he be here?" "I'll have him at your location by noon. His name is Gunner. Do not offer him small talk, do not ask to hold his weapon, and keep him supplied with cold water. He'll handle the rest." "Send Gunner," I said. I spent the next 3 hours anxiously pacing the house, occasionally peeking out the window. Every time a landscaping truck drove past, my heart jumped into my throat. But Brenda was biding her time. She was organizing her board meeting. She was drafting her ridiculous addendum. She thought she had won. At exactly 11:58 a.m., a matte black, unmarked Dodge Charger slowly rolled down my street. It pulled to a stop right against the curb, directly in front of the golden mailbox. The driver's side door opened, and a man stepped out. The dispatcher hadn't exaggerated. Gunner was massive. He had to be at least 6'4", built like a collegiate linebacker who had spent the last decade exclusively lifting heavy things and glaring at people. He was wearing black tactical boots, dark gray cargo pants with enough pockets to house a small arsenal, and a tight black polo shirt with ironclad security printed over the left breast. A heavy black nylon duty belt wrapped around his waist, holding a radio, 2 spare magazines, a pair of handcuffs, and a very large, very real Glock 19 in a level 3 retention holster. His head was shaved completely bald, and his eyes were hidden behind impenetrable, wraparound, polarized Oakley sunglasses. He didn't look like a guy you hired to guard a mailbox. He looked like a guy you hired to overthrow a small, unstable island nation. I practically ran out the front door to greet him. Gunner? I asked, approaching him cautiously. He slowly turned his head to look at me. He didn't smile. He didn't extend a hand. He just gave a curt nod. Client? Yes. Yes, that's me. I pointed toward the glowing golden post. That's the asset. Gunner walked slowly toward the mailbox, his boots crunching on the stray gravel in the driveway. He inspected it from 3 different angles, his expression completely unreadable behind the sunglasses. He reached out, stopping his finger exactly 1 millimeter from the surface, tracing the line of the wood without actually touching the clear coat. 24 karat? He asked, his voice a deep, rumbling baritone. Genuine, I nodded. Threat vector? Middle-aged woman, about 5'4". Usually wears heavily branded athletic wear. Responds to the name Brenda. She is armed with a clipboard, boundless suburban entitlement, and tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., she plans to arrive with a landscaping crew equipped with chainsaws. Gunner slowly turned his head to look across the street at Brenda's house. He analyzed the windows, the sight lines, the approach vectors. Understood, Gunner said. Rules of engagement? Do not let anyone touch the post, I said firmly. They can yell, they can scream, they can take pictures, but nobody touches the wood. Nobody brings a saw near it. If the HOA maintenance guys show up, you tell them they are trespassing on private property, and they need to leave immediately. If Brenda tries to physically assault the post, you stop her. But, legally and gently. Gunner gave another curt nod. Acknowledged. Static deterrence protocol. No lethal force authorized unless presented with a deadly threat. I'll need a chair. Perimeter establishment. Right away, I said, running over to the side of the house and grabbing my heavy-duty green canvas camping chair. It even had a built-in cup holder. I brought it over. Gunner didn't just place the chair anywhere. He moved with tactical precision. He placed the chair exactly 3 feet to the left of the mailbox, angling it so he had a clear, unobstructed 180-degree field of view of the street, my driveway, and Brenda's front door. He sat down. He placed his hands on his knees. He looked straight ahead, completely motionless. He looked like a gargoyle carved out of granite, guarding a monument of pure gold. It was the most beautiful, ridiculous thing I had ever orchestrated. I went inside and grabbed a small cooler, filling it with ice and 6 bottles of water, and placed it right next to his chair. You good, Gunner? I asked. Sector is secure, he replied, not moving his head. Okay, I'll be inside working. Yell if you need anything. I went back inside, locked the door, and immediately pulled up the live feed on my security camera monitor. I couldn't focus on work. I couldn't focus on anything. I just sat at my desk, eating a slightly stale protein bar, watching a heavily armed mercenary aggressively stare down a suburban cul-de-sac on behalf of a mailbox. The afternoon was absolute chaos, and I had front-row tickets. Word had clearly spread. The Desert Oasis neighborhood network was faster than fiber-optic broadband. Within an hour of Gunner setting up his post, the foot traffic on my street increased by roughly 500%. First came the dog walkers. A young couple walking a golden retriever came down the sidewalk. They were chatting, looking at their phones, totally oblivious until the golden retriever stopped dead in its tracks and let out a low woof. The couple looked up. They saw the blinding golden mailbox. Then, they saw the heavily armed, sunglass-wearing Titan sitting next to it. Gunner slowly turned his head to track them. He didn't say a word. He didn't make a sudden movement. He just watched them with the cold, calculating intensity of a predator assessing its prey. The couple visibly stiffened. The guy grabbed the dog's leash, pulling it tight against his leg, and they practically sprinted past my house, keeping their eyes glued to the pavement, terrified to make eye contact. Then came the slow drive-bys. A silver Lexus SUV drove past at roughly 2 miles an hour. I saw the passenger side window roll down and a cell phone poke out, clearly recording video. Gunnar reacted instantly. He stood up, tall and imposing, crossed his arms over his chest, and stared directly into the camera lens of the creeping vehicle. The Lexus hit the gas so hard the tires actually chirped on the asphalt, speeding off down the street. It was like this all afternoon. Neighbors pretending to check their own mailboxes while furiously rubbernecking. Kids on bicycles stopping at the end of the block, pointing and whispering. Gunnar never broke character. He was a professional. He drank water, he sat perfectly still, and he projected an aura of absolute, uncompromising security. Around 4 o'clock, the main event finally happened. Brenda's front door opened. She stepped out, this time wearing a floral blouse and tailored slacks, clearly dressed for her emergency HOA board meeting. She locked her door, turned around, and froze. From my monitor, I watched the exact moment her brain short-circuited. She saw the gold mailbox. But more importantly, she saw the man in tactical gear sitting right next to it, his hand resting casually near his duty belt. She took a tentative step onto her driveway. Gunnar instantly stood up. Brenda stopped. Gunnar adjusted his sunglasses. Brenda visibly swallowed hard. She didn't march over. She didn't scream. She actually looked terrified. She slowly backed up, retreated up her driveway, and practically threw herself into her Mercedes sedan parked in her garage. The garage door slammed shut, and a minute later, the Mercedes backed out so fast it nearly clipped the curb before speeding away toward the community clubhouse. I burst out laughing, clapping my hands together in the empty house. "Good boy, Gunnar," I whispered to the monitor. "Earn that $75 an hour." The evening passed without incident. Gunnar sat in his chair as the sun went down, taking out a small, high-powered tactical flashlight and occasionally sweeping the beam across the front yard, just to let the neighborhood know he was still there, still watching. I brought him a plate of grilled chicken and rice for dinner. He ate it in exactly 4 minutes, standing up, never taking his eyes off the street. I went to sleep that night feeling a strange mixture of absolute triumph and creeping anxiety. Brenda had backed down today, intimidated by the sheer absurdity of a private security guard. But tomorrow morning was the real deadline. Tomorrow at 8 a.m. was when the chainsaws were supposed to arrive. I knew Brenda. She wouldn't let this go. The board meeting she rushed off to was undoubtedly to secure the official paperwork to authorize the demolition. She was going to return, and she was going to bring reinforcements. I set my alarm for 6 a.m. The morning of the reckoning arrived. The sky was a pale, hazy blue, promising another brutally hot day. I made a pot of coffee, grabbed a mug, and walked outside. Gunnar was exactly where I left him. He didn't look tired. He didn't look bored. He looked like he was ready to deploy into a combat zone. "Morning, Gunnar. Quiet night?" I asked, handing him a fresh, cold bottle of water. "Negative contact," Gunnar reported, taking the water. "One raccoon attempted to breach the perimeter at 0200 hours, deterred with verbal command." I choked on my coffee, trying not to laugh. I pictured this massive, armed man yelling tactical commands at a startled raccoon. "Good work. Listen, the hostile force is scheduled to arrive in exactly 45 minutes. They usually roll up in a white Ford F-250, hauling a landscaping trailer. The primary target, Brenda, will likely be leading the charge." "Understood," Gunnar said, doing a quick press check of his firearm to ensure a round was chambered, a sound that was both deeply reassuring and slightly terrifying in a suburban driveway. "I will intercept at the property line." I pulled up a second lawn chair, placing it about 10 feet behind Gunnar's position. I wasn't going to miss this. I sat down, sipped my coffee, and waited. The minutes ticked by agonizingly slowly. 7:30 a.m., 7:45 a.m., 7:55 a.m. And then I heard it, the rumble of a heavy diesel engine. Down at the end of the street, turning off the main neighborhood thoroughfare, came a white Ford F-25. Pulling a massive open-air trailer loaded with lawn mowers, edgers, and landscaping tools. Following closely behind the truck, riding its bumper like a pilot fish on a shark, was Brenda's silver Mercedes. This was it. The showdown at the Golden Post. The landscaping truck pulled up slowly, the driver looking confused as he spotted the towering, reflective gold pillar and the massive, armed man standing in front of it. The truck parked on the street, right at the edge of my driveway. Brenda slammed her Mercedes into park right behind the trailer and practically leaped out of her car, a manila folder clutched in her hand. She marched forward, flanked by Hector, the head of the HOA landscaping crew, a sweet, hard-working guy who currently looked like he wanted to be absolutely anywhere else on the planet. Hector was holding a bright orange Husqvarna chainsaw, holding it loosely by the handle, looking nervously between Brenda, the gold post, and Gunnar. Gunnar stepped forward. He placed his heavy boots exactly on the invisible line that separated the public street from my private property. He crossed his arms. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, blocking the path like a human brick wall. Brenda stopped 3 feet away from him, clearly intimidated, but propelled forward by pure, bureaucratic fury. "Move aside," Brenda demanded, pointing a trembling finger at Gunnar's chest. "I am the president of the Desert Oasis Homeowners Association, and we are here on official, board-mandated business to remove a non-compliant structure." Gunnar looked down at her. He spoke in a voice that was eerily calm, yet carried the undeniable weight of a threat. "Ma'am, you are standing on the edge of private property. I am a licensed, armed protection officer contracted by the homeowner to secure this asset. You and the gentleman with the saw are not authorized to cross this line. If you attempt to damage this property, you will be physically restrained, and law enforcement will be immediately notified." Brenda's face flushed a deep, vibrant purple. She waved the manila folder in the air. "I have the authorization right here. The board voted last night. This structure is an immediate hazard to the community aesthetic, and under Section 7, Paragraph C, we have the right to forcibly remedy the violation." She turned to Hector. "Hector, start the saw. Cut it down, right now. That is a direct order from the board." Hector looked at Brenda. He looked at the golden, gleaming post. Then he looked up at Gunnar. Gunnar slowly dropped his right hand, letting it rest very casually, very deliberately, on the grip of his holstered firearm. Hector immediately took 3 massive steps backward, shaking his head violently. "No way, Mrs. Brenda. I'm not doing it. I cut grass. I trim trees. I don't mess with guys with guns over a mailbox. You want it cut down? You do it yourself." Hector dropped the chainsaw onto the grass next to the curb, turned around, and jogged back to the safety of his truck, locking the doors. Brenda let out a shriek of pure frustration. She was losing control of the situation, and she knew it. She looked at the chainsaw lying on the grass. She looked at the golden post. She looked at me, sitting in my lawn chair, sipping my coffee with a smug smile on my face. "Fine," she screamed, her voice cracking. "You want to play it like this? You want to bring hired thugs into this community to intimidate the board? You think you're above the law?" She reached into the pocket of her slacks, pulled out her cell phone, and aggressively dialed 911. "Yes, police? she yelled into the phone, her voice dripping with manufactured panic. "I need officers dispatched to Desert Oasis immediately. There is a lunatic homeowner who has hired an armed mercenary. He's threatening me. He's threatening the maintenance crew. He is completely unhinged, and I fear for my life." She hung up the phone and glared at me with absolute triumph. "You're done. When the police get here, he is going to jail. You are going to jail, and I am going to personally push that tacky piece of garbage over myself." I didn't panic. I didn't flinch. I just took another slow sip of my coffee, savoring the bitter, dark roast. I had been waiting for this exact moment. I wanted her to call the cops, because Brenda had just made the biggest, most critical mistake of her entire tyrannical career. She thought she was fighting a battle over HOA bylaws. She didn't realize she was about to commit a federal offense. Honestly, watching her pace back and forth on the asphalt like a caged, heavily hair-sprayed ferret was like the absolute highlight of my entire year. I mean, she literally thought the police were her own personal customer service hotline, just waiting to be dispatched to solve her minor aesthetic disagreements. The wait wasn't long. Scottsdale police response times in affluent neighborhoods are notoriously fast, especially when a hysterical woman calls in a report of an armed mercenary threatening the peace. Within exactly 6 minutes, the distant wail of sirens cut through the morning air, growing louder and louder until 2 white and blue Scottsdale PD cruisers came aggressively tearing around the corner. Their light bars were flashing, casting a strobe effect across the manicured lawns, and more importantly, bouncing violently off my 24-karat gold mailbox post. It looked like a mobile disco had just crashed into a suburban driveway. The cruisers slammed into park right behind Hector's landscaping trailer, completely blocking the street. The doors popped open, and 3 officers stepped out. The lead officer, a tall, exhausted-looking guy, with graying temples whose name tag read Miller, took one look at the scene and visibly sighed. He had the distinct aura of a man who was expecting a hostage situation and instead found a homeowners association dispute. Brenda naturally sprinted toward him like he was her long-lost savior. "Officer! Officer! Thank God you're here!" she shrieked, waving her arms frantically, completely ignoring the fact that the 2 backup officers had their hands resting cautiously on their duty weapons. "Arrest him! Arrest both of them immediately! That man is armed, he is dangerous, and he just threatened the life of my landscaping crew." Officer Miller held up a hand, effectively putting a wall between himself and Brenda's hysteria. "Ma'am, I need you to step back, take a deep breath, and calm down. Who is threatening who? And why is there a guy in tactical gear standing next to a—" He stopped, squinting against the blinding glare of the morning sun hitting the gold leaf. "What in the actual hell is that?" "It's a mailbox post," Brenda wailed, pointing an accusatory finger. "He painted it neon yellow just to spite me. I am the president of the HOA. I gave him a legal order to remove it, and he hired a heavily armed thug to prevent me from doing my job. Hector was just trying to cut it down, and that giant threatened to shoot him." Miller looked over at Hector, who was currently hiding behind the rear wheel of his trailer, aggressively shaking his head. Then, Miller looked at Gunnar. Gunnar hadn't moved an inch. He hadn't drawn his weapon. He hadn't even adjusted his posture. He just stood exactly on the property line, his arms crossed, staring blankly ahead through his mirrored Oakleys. "All right," Miller muttered, gesturing for his backup officers to stand down slightly. He walked slowly up my driveway, stopping a few feet away from Gunnar. "Morning. I'm Officer Miller, Scottsdale PD. You want to tell me what's going on here? And maybe let me see some ID and your armed guard card?" Gunnar smoothly uncrossed his arms, moving slowly and deliberately so as not to startle the officers. He reached into his left cargo pocket, retrieved a sleek black wallet, and extracted his Arizona Department of Public Safety Armed Security Guard license, along with his state ID. He handed them to Miller. "Gunner Hayes. Ironclad Security Solutions," Gunner said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "I am contracted by the homeowner to provide static asset protection for the structure behind me. I have made no threats of lethal force. I merely informed the aggressive party that she was attempting to trespass on private property and that any attempt to destroy the asset would result in physical restraint and a call to your department." Miller inspected the licenses, nodded, and handed them back. He looked past Gunner to where I was sitting in my lawn chair, taking a highly dramatic, slow sip of my coffee. "And you're the homeowner?" Miller asked, raising an eyebrow. "I am, officer," I said, standing up and walking over, leaving my coffee on the chair. "I mean, care for a donut or maybe a water? It's getting pretty hot out here already." "I'll pass on the donut," Miller said, looking back and forth between me and the glowing obelisk. "Can you please explain to me why I have 2 cruisers responding to an armed standoff over a piece of wood covered in... Is that foil?" "It's 24-karat gold leaf, officer," I corrected politely. "Applied just last night by a certified contractor. I guess you could call it a modern art installation, but functionally it holds my mail." "He's mocking you!" Brenda screamed from the street, physically unable to handle the fact that nobody had been handcuffed yet. "He is in direct violation of the Desert Oasis Master Deed. I have the paperwork right here. The board voted to forcefully remove the structure." She marched forward, trying to shove the manila folder into Officer Miller's chest. Miller took a step back, looking incredibly annoyed. "Ma'am, HOA bylaws are a civil matter. The police department does not enforce neighborhood paint colors. If you have a dispute, you take it to civil court. You don't call 911 and claim there's an active shooter." "He is preventing us from accessing the easement," Brenda argued, her voice reaching a pitch only dogs should be able to hear. "The bylaws state that if a homeowner refuses to remedy a severe aesthetic violation, the board has the right to step onto the property and remove it. He's breaking a contract, and he brought a gun to a neighborhood dispute." Miller sighed, running a hand over his face. He turned back to me. "Look, buddy, I don't care how much money you spent on this thing. If your HOA has a clause that says they can remove non-compliant structures, and you're using an armed guard to stop them, you're bordering on disturbing the peace and potentially creating a public nuisance. Is this really worth going to jail over?" "I'm not going to jail, Officer Miller," I said, dropping the casual act and reaching under my lawn chair. I pulled out a thick, heavily tabbed 3-ring binder. I had spent 2 hours putting it together last night. I walked over and placed it on the hood of his cruiser. Because I am not in violation of anything. In fact, I am the only person here following the rules to the absolute letter. I flipped the binder open to the first tab. Let's address the civil matter first, just to clear the air. Right here is a copy of the citation Brenda issued to me yesterday morning. Miller leaned in and read the bright pink slip. "Notice the demanded remedy," I pointed out, tapping the bottom line. "It explicitly states that I must coat the post in a naturally occurring earth tone or metallic finish. I literally hired a contractor to apply gold. Gold is a naturally occurring element. Gold is metal. Therefore, this post is finished in a naturally occurring metallic finish." I have complied exactly with her written, legally binding citation. Miller read the line, looked at the post, and then looked at me. A very small, very suppressed smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. He looked over at Brenda. "Ma'am, did you write this citation?" "That is entirely out of context," Brenda sputtered, her face turning redder by the second. The spirit of the rule implies muted, dignified colors. Bronze, brown, not a literal gold bar. The law doesn't care about the spirit of your feelings, Brenda, I shot back, loving every single second of this. It cares about what is written on the paper. You demanded a metallic finish. You got a metallic finish. Officer, would you agree that from a purely civil standpoint, I have met the literal requirements of her demand? I'm a cop, not a lawyer, Miller said, though his tone was distinctly more relaxed now. But yeah, if the paper says metallic finish, and you put actual metal on it, I'd say a judge is going to laugh her out of civil court. It doesn't matter, Brenda shrieked, losing whatever tiny shred of sanity she had left. She lunged forward, pointing violently at Hector's abandoned chainsaw on the grass. The board voted. The structure is a hazard. If Hector won't do it, I will do it myself. I am not leaving here until that tacky piece of garbage is cut down to the dirt. She took 2 steps toward the chainsaw. Gunner's hand instantly went up, his palm facing outward in a universal stop gesture. Ma'am, do not attempt to touch that equipment or cross this line. Miller put his hand on Brenda's shoulder, stopping her physical forward momentum. Ma'am, you need to calm down right now. If you grab that saw and try to cut down his property, I am going to arrest you for vandalism and destruction of private property. Do you understand me? It is not his property, Brenda yelled, tears of absolute furious frustration welling up in her eyes. It's on the HOA easement. The HOA owns the easement. We dictate what goes on it. It's our property. Actually, I said, my voice cutting through her screaming smooth and cold as ice. That's where you're dead wrong, Brenda. I flipped the binder to the 2nd tab. This was it. This was the kill shot I had been waiting to deliver since yesterday morning. I pulled out a perfectly printed, highlighted, and laminated sheet of paper. Officer Miller, I said, handing him the document. I'd like to direct your attention to Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 1705. Miller took the paper, furrowing his brow as he read the heavy legal text. I'll summarize it for the class, I said loudly, making sure the neighbors currently watching from their porches could hear every word. Federal law explicitly dictates that the moment a mail receptacle is installed, properly erected, and ready for the receipt of mail, it officially becomes part of the United States Postal Service network. It is, for all intents and purposes, considered federal property. I took a step toward Brenda, who was suddenly looking very confused and very, very small. 18 U.S. Code Section 1705, I continued, reciting it entirely from memory, states that whoever willfully or maliciously tears down, destroys, or in any manner injures any letterbox or other receptacle intended or used for the receipt or delivery of mail on any mail route, shall be fined under this title, or imprisoned not more than 3 years, or both. I let the words hang in the air. 3 years. Wait, Officer Miller said, looking up from the paper, his eyes wide. Are you saying— I'm saying, I nodded, that the wooden post is structurally integral to the mailbox itself. You cannot cut down the post without destroying the functionality of the mail receptacle. Therefore, the post is protected under federal postal regulations. I turned slowly to Brenda. She was pale. The vibrant peach color of her tracksuit suddenly made her look incredibly washed out and sick. Brenda, I said, practically whispering, but ensuring the malice dripped off every syllable. You didn't just organize a board meeting to commit civil vandalism. You organized a conspiracy to commit a federal felony. You literally brought a landscaping crew here to willfully and maliciously destroy federal property, and then you called the police to document your intent. I turned back to Officer Miller, gesturing grandly to Gunner. Officer, my armed guard is not here to disturb the peace. He is not here to threaten the HOA. I hired ironclad security for the sole, explicit purpose of preventing a crazed local civilian from committing a federal crime on my property. He is guarding federal infrastructure. Complete and utter silence descended on the cul-de-sac. Even the birds seemed to stop chirping. The only sound was the low, rumbling idle of the police cruisers. Officer Miller stared at the laminated federal code. He stared at the golden mailbox. He stared at Gunner, who gave a very slight, almost imperceptible nod of confirmation. Then, Miller turned his gaze to Brenda. All the annoyance, all the patience, all the customer service cop demeanor vanished from Miller's face. He looked at her with the stern, unforgiving glare of a law enforcement officer who had just been weaponized by an idiot. "Mrs. Brenda," Miller said, his voice dangerously low. "Is this true? Did you order this landscaping crew to bring a chainsaw to cut down this man's active mailbox?" The bylaws?" Brenda stammered, entirely unable to form a coherent sentence. Her clipboard shook violently in her hands. "I don't give a damn about your bylaws," Miller snapped, stepping closer to her, forcing her to shrink back. "I care about federal law. This man has clearly demonstrated that his mailbox is legally protected. If you, or Hector, or anyone from your little board so much as scratches the paint on that box, or takes a saw to that wood, it stops being an HOA dispute. It becomes a federal offense, and I will personally put you in handcuffs, drag you down to the station, and hand you over to the postal inspector. Do you have any idea how seriously the USPIS takes destruction of their property?" Brenda was physically trembling now. The absolute, unassailable power she thought she wielded as HOA president had just shattered against the brick wall of the United States federal government. She looked at Hector's truck. She looked at the flashing police lights. She looked at the golden post, which was practically mocking her with its brilliance. "But the color," she whimpered weakly, a final pathetic attempt to cling to her authority. "The color is none of my business," Miller said, gesturing aggressively down the street. "Your business here is done. You are going to instruct your landscaper to pack up his equipment and leave this street immediately. Then, you are going to go back inside your house, and you are going to leave this man and his mailbox alone. If I get called back out here today because you're harassing him, I will arrest you for filing a false police report and misuse of the 911 system. Are we absolutely 100% clear?" Brenda didn't speak. She couldn't. She just nodded her head, a jerky, humiliated movement. She turned around, dropped her manila folder onto the asphalt, and practically ran back to her Mercedes. She didn't even look at Hector. Hector, sensing the shifting winds, had already sprinted out from behind his trailer. He grabbed his orange chainsaw off the grass, tossed it haphazardly into the back of his truck, jumped into the driver's seat, and peeled out of the neighborhood so fast he left black tire marks on the pavement. Officer Miller watched them go, letting out a long, heavy exhale. He took off his uniform cap, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and turned back to me. "I gotta tell you, man," Miller said, a genuine, tired smile finally breaking across his face. "I've been on the force for 18 years. I've dealt with a lot of crazy suburban neighbor disputes, but I have never ever seen someone weaponize the postal code and a mercenary to win an argument over a paint color." "Honestly, officer," I grinned, leaning back against my golden post, "it's a sovereign ruling classic. You push me over a technicality, I push back with a federal mandate." "Just do me a favor," Miller said, handing me back the binder. "Try not to blind any pilots flying into Sky Harbor with that thing, okay? I'll look into a matte clear coat for next year," I promised. Miller chuckled, put his hat back on, and signaled for his backup to clear the scene. As he got into his cruiser, he rolled down the window and gave Gunner a two-finger salute. Gunner didn't smile, but he did give a slow, respectful nod back. The police cruisers killed their lights, backed up, and drove off down the street, leaving the cul-de-sac in relative peace once again. I stood in my driveway, the adrenaline slowly leaving my system, replaced by a wave of absolute euphoric victory. I looked over at Gunner. He was already sitting back down in his canvas lawn chair, scanning the perimeter, completely unfazed by the fact that he had just participated in the absolute destruction of an HOA tyrant. "Good job, Gunner," I said. "You want to order some pizzas for lunch?" "Negative," Gunner said, not looking away from the street. "Carbohydrates compromise tactical alertness, but I will accept another bottle of water." I laughed, went inside, and grabbed him a water. The war wasn't completely over yet. There was still the fallout. There was still the board meeting. But the Battle of the Golden Post? That was a flawless, indisputable victory.